I'm Theo.
And I'm Juliet.
And this is Apologies Accepted.
We offer an entertaining look at some of the big issues in history by examining public apologies of the famous and infamous.
We're looking at politicians, serial killers, actors, and you.
Send us a public apology you would like to make, and we'll read it on the air and give you a chance to redeem yourself, or just get some guilt off your shoulders.
We're here for you. Once a week, maybe more if you're really, really sorry.
Hi, everybody. This is Apologies Accepted, the podcast. And I'm not Theo.
And I'm not Juliet.
Yay. It's good that we're ourselves. Today we're going to be talking about witches, but before we get to that, what's shaking bacon?
What's shaking bacon? When you sent me the email, all it said was witches and then had a link to the article. I was so excited. I was like, yay, this is for me, because we had to do the sports thing last week. And so This is me. Yay. It's like you threw a pile of cocaine on the floor and handed me a gold straw. I just couldn't have been happier. And then, I don't know, the week, like, we had a friend come over for dinner last night, and that was real normal pre-COVID stuff. Hugged, didn't even think about, oh my gosh, we shouldn't be hugging. I've been out and about in stores. I carry my mask with me in my hand now, but I don't put it on my face. I just sort of dangle it like a little Barbie purse, just to let people know. I might have some change in here. Where do you hold your
Barbie purse?
Well, that goes in my pocket.
Okay.
Let's see. And then work. So, yay, work, yay.
Yay, work. It brings in the cash.
It brings in the cash is right. And it leaves my fingers as soon as I touch it.
For real.
Gone and gone and gone on the dumbest stuff. Like, I need another fucking pillow in this house. Okay, and what about you? What's shaking bacon?
I bought some Tom Ford lipstick.
Oh, well, you have been gone for a month. I've got
several of them now, so I'm ashamed to say that I just love it, though. It's so nice, and the colors are just amazing. But anyway, this is not a makeup podcast. I have been in Arizona, as most of you will recall, for the past 5 or 6 weeks, and I'm coming home now. So I'm on more or less midway in Santa Clarita, California. So just chilling out, getting a good night's sleep last night at the lovely dog-friendly hotel. Other than that, not too much going on. Just work. Work is finally, thank God, work is finally starting to calm down a little bit now that I've hired another person to help me. So thank God that he exists, this person that I hired, because he's good. And he is taking a massive weight off my shoulders. So I'm feeling a little bit better about things in general now. And I'm looking forward to going home and seeing my husband and having some pineapple, because I can't get really good fruits or vegetables or anything in Arizona. There's this one market, and it's kind of crappy. So I've missed eating good food while I've been gone. I plan to make up for that today when I get home by ordering some spring rolls and some
Still with the spring rolls.
Still with the spring rolls. Telling you, I need them. And eating some cake and some what do you call it? Pineapple before it's some food before I go back on my diet tomorrow. But I have lost 26 pounds, which I said last week that I would be excited when I lost 25 pounds. So I'm totally excited now. 25 pounds seems like a lot to me. I can't really tell the difference. I mean, I kind of can, but it seems like if you lose 25 pounds, you should really be able to notice, but whatever. I've got some more weight to lose, so we'll see how that goes. But all is well in Juliet land. All is well in Juliet land. And I am so excited not only to hear that, but you're a real American hero. Because 26 pounds is a massive achievement. Congratulations. Couldn't do it without the drugs.
I thought you were going to say me. I was going to say.
Couldn't do it without you.
Yeah. Well, that's true, Juliet.
So, good news all around today. Let's talk about the witches.
Let's talk about witches. Yippee.
Are you ready? I don't know. I'm not sure you're ready.
I have been ready for this since the day I was born.
Didn't we talk about witches once before, or am I wrong?
We did. So we talked about the Salem witch trials, which happened in America, and the apology
Thanks for that.
Was from, well, you're welcome. Well, I have to set up the audience, right?
Okay.
For what? How is this different from your Salem thing? And wasn't one witch hunt the same as another? Largely, yes. I mean, that's a witch and then you kill her. It's typically always a her. But that apology came from one of the accusers who, in the 1600s, said, "Oh, all these people in my village are witches." And then, as an adult, that person, Anne, oh my God, Paris Hutchins? I can't remember her name. It's Anne for sure.
Okay.
Apologized, right? So we rated her apology. This is a government saying, "Oh God, you guys were real sorry for all the witches that we burned." And so it's and burned versus hanged. So
the worst.
In America and in the U.S., witches were hanged. It was a sign of treason. And then in Europe, witchcraft was a heresy and heretics burned.
I see.
And Scotland burned their witches. I'm sure there were some hangings as well. And how and why Scotland itself burned witches, I don't know. I didn't dive that far into the politics of it. But we'll go. I mean, we'll just let that one go. There's a reason why some countries hanged witches and some countries burned people, and the difference was how the crime was seen. It was either heresy against the church or it was an act of treason against your king.
Gotcha.
There we go.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
As much as anything does about witch hunts.
Yeah, right. So between the late 16th century and 18th century, about 4,000 people in Scotland were accused of witchcraft. About 2/3, or 2,500, were executed or burned, I assume. Many confessions were given under duress. So most often it was sleep deprivation, but there was also physical torture such as thumb screws and iron muzzles. Yes, which sounds very painful. And in Scotland, about 84% of the people accused of witchcraft were women. And I just had to put this in. The New York Times said, I thought it was funny, this paragraph, unlike the United States, whose own shameful history of witch trials in Salem, Massachusetts led to official exonerations and victim memorials, the Scottish government had never apologized for the atrocities committed against its citizens. So I was like, okay, New York Times, that's a little America-centric of you. But okay, yeah, America's great.
America ended up being wonderful to the witches it killed, but Scotland still being mean to those witches it killed.
Yeah, so... funny. Anyway, witch trials in Scotland were encouraged by the Protestant clergy and were conducted at the local level, where judges had little oversight and could more easily use torture to extract more confessions, according to Michelle Brock, an associate professor at Washington and Lee University in Virginia, who teaches about the histories of the supernatural. She said, "It was an environment of heightened religious anxiety. The clergy, local magistrates, and the monarchy cooperated in the project of building a godly state, and a godly state can't countenance witches." Women were especially vulnerable to accusations of witchcraft, in part because they were seen as more susceptible to Faustian bargains, Professor Brock said. Who is most likely to be vulnerable to the devil? Who is most likely to make a pact to exchange their soul in return for goods and power? She said, people imagined women because they didn't have the same degree of power in society. I like that. And I like the way she said people imagined women, not women. Women are more likely to make Faustian bargains. So what happened? This year on International Women's Day, Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland's first minister, issued a formal apology to the people tortured and executed under the Witchcraft Act of 1563. That law, which was passed by the Scottish Parliament, made witchcraft or consulting with witches a capital offence. In her speech before Parliament, Sturgeon said, "Those who met this fate were not witches, they were people, and they were overwhelmingly women. It was injustice on a colossal scale, driven at least in part by misogyny in its most literal sense, hatred of women. At a time when women were not even allowed to speak as witnesses in a courtroom, they were accused and killed because they were poor, different, vulnerable, or in many cases, just because they were women," she said. Sturgeon said there were 3 reasons why this generation should apologize for events that took place centuries ago. Firstly, acknowledging injustice, no matter how historic, is important. The Parliament has issued, rightly so, formal apologies and pardons for the more recent historic injustices suffered by gay men and by minors. Second, for some, this is not yet historic. There are parts of our world where even today, women and girls face persecution and sometimes death because they have been accused of witchcraft. And thirdly, fundamentally, while here in Scotland the Witchcraft Act may have been consigned to history a long time ago, the deep misogyny that motivated it has not. We live with that still. Today it expresses itself not in claims of witchcraft, but in everyday harassment, online rape threats, and sexual violence. As First Minister, on behalf of the Scottish Government, she continued, I am choosing to acknowledge the egregious historic injustice and extend a formal posthumous apology to all those accused, convicted, vilified, or executed under the Witchcraft Act of 1563. I don't know why she says online rape threats, like people don't get rape threats in real life, but I'll just leave that aside.
I'm gonna guess that online you have a physical evidence that something has been said, whereas in the real world, if somebody says something, maybe it becomes he said, she said sort of stuff, right?
I see.
Is my guess, but also maybe there's some big government online
maybe some online
stuff,
anti-harassment thing happening.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
I just beat you to it. So lawyer Claire Mitchell and writer Zoe Venditazi founded Witches of Scotland after partnering up to create a true crime podcast. On International Women's Day in 2020, the two launched the Witches of Scotland campaign, which pushed for the Scottish Parliament to pardon and memorialize the accused. Last year, organizers submitted a petition bearing the signatures of more than 3,400 supporters to the Scottish government. And I understand that this had a role in Sturgeon making her speech, that the petition was actually influential. So Mitchell and Venditazi told the New York Times that they were delighted with Sturgeon's speech. Miss Mitchell said, however, that the campaign's efforts would not stop until Scotland formally pardoned the victims and erected a monument to them. We want there to be a state national monument that will mark what happened, Venditazi said. Let people know what happened if they're traveling to the country, and will stand for us to remember this terrible miscarriage of justice for many, many, many years to come.
You know, witches are never satisfied.
That's right. She is Witches of Scotland. That kind of does imply that they're witches, but I don't know if that's what it is.
Oh, they're totally witches. I mean,
are they?
I'm just going to say they are.
Okay.
But I don't know that they are, right? But that's exactly how a lot of... I'll just say I can imagine any of my Wiccan friends saying what you just said, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
to me, that speaks very strongly that this is a witch saying, hey guys, leave me alone.
I wonder if they ever made their true crime podcast.
I don't know. There's no way to find out.
There's no way to find out.
You'll never know.
I'll have to look it up.
It'll be a mystery that will haunt you until the end of days.
The day that I die. So that's my news. That's my portion of the news. What are your historical notes?
Oh, well, I'm going to say we're either 334 or 434. You know how I am with math and numbers. Leading history podcast on the globe, right?
Yes.
Worldwide. Yeah, so I had to go into the history of it. And also, it was like, oh my gosh, are you kidding? We get to talk about witches and the 17th century? Wow, this is great.
That's
no
good, 'cause
problem.
I don't know anything about either.
You are going to learn so much thanks to me.
So excited.
Starting right now, I am here to tell you all about witches in Scotland, right?
Yay.
Okay. So witch hunting in Scotland began around 1550. And then the Parliament of Queen Mary passed the Scottish Witchcraft Act in 1563, making convictions for witchcraft subject to capital punishment, death, right? You're convicted of being a witch, you are killed. Mary's son James wrote a book called Demonology in 1597. James went on to become not only the King of Scotland, but also the King of England. He took the throne after the death of Queen Elizabeth. So let's see. So he wrote Demonology in 1597 after his involvement with 2 witch hunts as king. So he was king at this point. The first one was the North Berwick witch trials in 1590, which went on for about 2 years with 70 accusations, including Francis Stuart, the 5th Earl of Bothwell, and as well the Great Scottish Witch Hunt of 1597, which was a nationwide hunt that started in Aberdeen. So both of these events sort of influenced James to... He was obsessed with witches. We will just say he was absolutely obsessed with witches. So let's take a quick look at these 2 events. The first one, the North Berwick witch trials of 1590, started thanks to Denmark. Hi, Denmark, looking at you. You guys keep your witches to yourselves. So James had been engaged to a princess of Denmark, Anne of Denmark, and they had a marriage by proxy, and she was set to sail to England to have the actual real physical marriage, but then also be Queen of England. And storms kept her ship at home. And it took, I'm going to say a year, but let's say it was more than a couple of months, right? So the weather was just bad, and there was no safe way to get a princess across the ocean, right? Mm-hmm. Fishermen, you can get them by the dozen, but a princess, got to keep her safe. So James got tired of waiting. He was ready to produce an heir. He had inherited the throne from a childless queen, and not only a queen, but a woman. And we'll say that the English government was pretty much like, okay, we got a man now. We need some kids. We need to get normality installed back in this country. So he needed his wife. So he went over to Denmark to get her. And he was able to make it to Denmark, but they still had trouble leaving. Right? And then it came out that the trouble was because of witches. And so
makes sense.
This was the first major witchcraft persecution in Scotland, and the North Berwick witch trials began with a sensational case of the king trying to marry his queen or his princess, and some women in Denmark confessed to causing the storms. They didn't want that marriage to happen. And they were, how dare there can only be one princess, and it's me, it's not you. So, an admiral of the Danish fleet, this all sort of started, blamed the storm on the wife of a high official in Copenhagen, whom he had insulted. The Copenhagen witch trials were held in Denmark in 1590. 6 women confessed to raising the storms and delaying Queen Anne's voyage, and that on Halloween night they had sent devils to climb up the keel of her ship. In September, 2 of the women were burned as witches in Kronborg, which is a Danish castle stronghold. James, by this point, had made it back to England with Anne and heard about the outcome of the trials, and he decided to set up some trials of his own, right? Because if there are witches in Denmark, there's got to be some witches in Scotland, and witches can control the weather, so let's get rid of them. So very soon, about 100 suspected witches in North Berwick were arrested, and many confessed under torture to having met the devil in the church at night, and they devoted themselves to evil, including trying to poison the king and other members of his household and attempting to sink the king's ship. Famously, a woman named Agnes Sampson, who was a 70-year-old woman from Humby, refused to confess during the North Berwick trials. So she had been implicated by somebody.
So these other women presumably confessed under torture, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely under torture. And so Agnes refused to confess. She was brought before King James. She was tortured. She confessed. And then for her confession, she was shaved entirely. All of her body hair was removed. And then she was held against the wall in her cell by an item called a witch's bridle, which is a cast iron, sort of a horse bridle with 4 prongs. 2 were stuck into the tongue and 2 in the cheeks. And your mouth was forced open. And if you tried to speak or close your mouth, you drew blood.
Oh, my God.
She confessed to all 53 charges against her. So King James not only famously wrote Demonology, which is exactly what you might think it is. It's a book about like, this is what a witch looks like, and this is what they do, and these are the spirits they control, and I know all this stuff, right? He wrote the Bible. He wrote the King James Bible. And in the King James Bible, there is specifically a line that is quite famous: "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live."
Right.
There might be a little bit of, what's the word I'm looking for? Forced manipulation translation of the word witch, right? So possibly, maybe, potentially, probably, the original word was poisoner.
No.
There was also a concept in Greece of good witches versus evil witches. And there was a word for evil witches, which also apparently took the same root as poisoner or whatever, right? So even if it was witches, it was an evil witch because there was a distinction between white magic, black magic. We'll just put it that way. So in 1663, the Scottish Witchcraft Act was passed, where it was only punishable. You could only be killed if your magic was used to kill another person.
Okay.
Right? So you couldn't be killed for flying in the sky or having sex with Satan.
Right.
But if you kill that baby lady, and you are going to be set on fire.
It's curtains for you.
So that, it kind of like started to get a handle on things a little bit. Let's see here. Let's start with the real reason I'm very excited about all this. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good.
So that was sort of the conditions, how witchcraft started, who kind of was leading it. It's the king. He had a personal invested interest in witches and witchcraft. He definitely had a thing for witches. And my guess is that these trials were particularly vicious in Scotland because the King of Scotland was personally obsessed with witches, but then later went on to become the King of England. And his ascent to the throne assured a Protestant reign over both countries, Scotland and England, right? Whereas there was always the threat that Catholicism and a Catholic king might be reinstated. Yes. So I think a lot of this was kind of the same thing that we saw in Salem, where the king was like, "Oh, I just wrote this Bible, and I'm on the devil's radar because I am so holy and so good, and God is talking to me, and I am magnificent. So the devil's trying to persecute me, and he's using his witches to do it." All right. So in 1833, we're going to go to 1833 to say that a historian named Robert Pitcairn came across some confessions from a Scottish witch trial, and he was mesmerized. There were 4 confessions from a woman named Isabel Gowdy. And Isabelle Gowdy is in metaphysical circles, a bunch of witch podcasts. She's the queen of the witches. Oh. Her 4 confessions are lurid recountings of sex with the devil and spells and visitations with the fairy realm and feasting with the queen of fairies, and just a treasure trove for folklorists. And we'll say that in her confessions, which are highly detailed, we also get the first appearances of witches taking the shape of animals, of covens, and specifically of covens consisting of 13 people. And we'll say, like, historians and scholars and folklorists all like to point to these confessions and say it's from the imaginings of this particular woman that sort of I forget the word I'm looking for, but like the cliches around witches, this is where they all come from, right?
Okay.
So cool. Isabel, there's nothing known about her beyond she was married. She married a guy named John, I think his last name's Gilbert, and there's some guesses around her social class, but really She doesn't burst into history until her confessions, and she disappears immediately after her confessions. So we know she was married. We know she confessed to witchcraft. Okay, so let's take a look at the world that Isabel lived in, right? And specifically, I mean, what was her village life like? So the village itself, and that's being quite generous, wasn't really a village. Isabel and her husband were probably tenant farmers of someone who rented the land from the laird or the chief landholder. So they weren't even renting the land. They were working for a tenant of the land, right? So this would have been a small collection of cottages huddled together. The center courtyard around these in the area just around the cottages in general would have been muck of mud and dung and chickens scratching up worms. The house itself would have been low walls of turf mixed with bits of stone. So you're just pulling ground up and propping it up with logs. A thatch roof of broom or marm grass, one door, and then one unglazed window, which I had to look up because I sort of thought glazed meant shiny. And I was like, who cares if the window's not shiny? No, glazed means glass. And so what they're saying when they say an unglazed window there was a hole in the wall.
Oh, my God.
And then you could close it up with shutters or an animal hide.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, it's so much more fun. I can't wait. Okay. So in the novel from 1658 called Northern Memoirs, one of the characters says, in my opinion, Scottish cottages are but little better than huts, and generally the same size, all built so low that their eaves hang dangling to touch the earth. In 1699, Edward Ward said that the houses of the poor were so small that it is no difficulty to piss over them. I mean, that's the new everything.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I'm sorry you don't get to piss over any houses, but, well, on an airplane, I guess. But, okay, so enough of that. In 1794, which is 100 and some odd years later, James Donaldson observed that in Nairnshire, which is in northern Scotland, the habitations of the poor tenants in the district are mean, dark, and dirty cottages built of turf without order or connection with each other. Yeah. The house itself would have been about 4 meters wide, which is like 12 feet. And the floor would have been like beaten earth or hard clay. And the space itself would have been divided in two, and the animals would have been kept on one side in cold weather and at night to prevent theft, but also for heat. One, to keep the animals warm, and two, the more the merrier when it's freezing outside. The fireplace was likely to have been in the center of the room, built directly on the floor, backed by a large flat stone against which the ashes could be banked. Smoke would have made its way upward and filtered out through the thatch, or maybe through a hole in the center of the roof. Sometimes that hole would have been topped with a rudimentary wooden chimney, perhaps made from an old bucket without a bottom. Arching over your head, the fire-blackened wood skeleton of the house would have been hung with baskets of dried fish and dried meat, preserving in the smoke. So it's going to be a small, smoky space, probably not super fun to live in.
Sounds horrible.
No furniture. They would have typically had 2 chests, one for meal, food, utensils, things like that, and the other for clothes. And then if they were lucky, they would have had 1 or 2 stools for sitting.
Wow.
James Kirkwood noticed in the 1660s that the poorer Scots generally sat about the ground around the fire. Kitchen utensils would have been mostly wooden, and then knives and cauldrons being made of metal would have been highly prized. In the corners of the cottage, sheepskins or piles of straw or heather, perhaps sewn together into rudimentary mattresses, would have been put to one side, ready to be flung around the fire at night. The living area, again, constantly smoky. In 1720s, so we're, 40, 50 years after the time of Isabelle Gowdy, in the 1720s, Edward Burt noticed that in the winter, the poor Scots close to the fire till their legs and thighs are scorched to an extraordinary degree, and many have sore eyes, and some are quite blind. This long continuance in the smoke makes them almost as black as chimney sweeps.
God.
Bert also noticed that when it rained, water frequently comes through the roof of the cottage and mixes with the sootiness of the inside, where all the sticks look like charcoal, and the rainwater falls and drops like ink onto the inhabitants below, while worms dislodged from their homes in the turfed walls and thatch fall to the floor.
I'm going to throw up.
Yeah. So this is what she's living in, right?
That's so bad.
Which sounds like there's not going to be a lot of food. There's not going to be a lot, your toilet is a hole you dig. There's probably some form of an outhouse somewhere, right? But but this is by our modern standards, what do they call it? Developing world.
Oh yeah.
Level of they are subsistence
That's
farmers living, whatever, right? It's bad. It's super bad. So nobody knows anything about Janet, right? Oh, I lied. Her name's not Janet. It's Isabel. Dang it. It is Isabel. So nobody knows anything much about Isabel herself other than she married this guy, right? Who was not even a tenant farmer. He worked for a tenant farmer. Records provide no information on Gowdy before her marriage to John Gilbert. He had no involvement in the witchcraft case. There's speculation that she was brought up in Aldern region, and I'm mispronouncing that a little bit, so sorry, Scottish family. I can't help it. Learn to spell the names of your towns the way you pronounce them. And let's see. There's no detail on her age. She could have been anywhere from about 15 to 50. People get real excited, though, to start talking about her age because she mentions in her confession that she's been sexually active for 15 years. And so people are like, well, there's no way she could have been 15. You think she should have been sexually active as a young child. And there's right. And so, she probably wasn't 15. But there's this real desire out there to make Isabelle Gowdy gorgeous and young.
Yeah.
Right. They even ascribe red hair to her. Right. She's a redheaded beauty. And it's like, nobody knows any of that, everybody. Calm down. Quit projecting your fantasies onto this woman. Let's see. So we talked a little bit about what her living conditions were like. They lived around Loch Loy. And let's see here. So she seemingly, she just walked in and confessed. There's no record of her being tortured. There's no record of her being executed. So people fill in the blanks with whatever they want, right? But she explodes into history because of her 4 confessions made over a 6-week period. The first was dated April 13th of 1662, and today is April 24th. So we are in the period of the 6 weeks of confession of Isabelle Gowdy. Today is 2022. That was 1662. So that was like 4,000 years ago. No, it's close to 400.
Yeah, it's 400.
300, and I'm not good. You know what? There are calculators, everybody. You don't need me to do your homework for you. Okay, so her first confession describes an encounter with the devil after she met him at a kirk in Aldern at night, right? And so let's see. Let's go into her first confession, and we'll just get a couple of pieces from it, right? So here's the scene. Isabelle Gowdy either just walked into the trial hall of her own accord, knowing that which trials were happening, or she was brought before the magistrate. Either way, she ends up being questioned. And so the question is, how did you meet the devil? As I was going between the farmsteads of Drumwooden and the Heeds, I met the devil, and there made a sort of covenant with him. I promised to him during the night we would meet in the Kirk of Aldrin, which I did. What happened? I just love it's like you're meeting the devil, and so what happened, right? That's the question, but also like what? The first thing I did that night was deny my baptism. Then I put one of my hands on the crown of my head and the other to the sole of my foot, and renounced all between my two hands to the devil. He was in the reader's desk with a black book in his hand. Margaret Brodie from Aldrin held me up to the devil to be baptized by him. And he marked me in the shoulder, and he sucked out my blood, and from that mark he spat it into his hand, and sprinkling it on my head, said, I baptize thee, Janet, in my own name.
Janet?
Yes, so he called her Janet, which I think is why there are so many sexy, hot names for witches. Janet, see, only Satan would name you something as boring and mundane as Janet. Sorry, Janet's out there. So he named her Janet, and honestly, it just makes me so sad for her. But clearly, what's happening in here is she's just recounting sort of the common belief that witches were witches because they denied Christianity, and so everything they did was in opposition to Christian beliefs and practices, right? So, of course, the devil's going to baptize her, right? It's like, you don't need to be baptized, whatever, fine. It's not even so much the concept of meeting a fairy queen or the devil. It's like, wow, this really tracks with Christianity. I wonder what's going on here, right? And so, fine. Her second confession, she starts getting a little more detailed about her sexual relations with the devil. We won't go into great detail there. She does. And what I love about the confessions is she starts telling these stories, right? And here she is, this woman who lives with inky rain falling on her, no food, talking about how she is getting back at the gentry and the priest and the laird, the guy the big guy, right, and his family, and she's punishing them, and she's flexing her power. And her confessions involve food, a lot of food, and a lot of drink. And she talks about how she and the witches cast spells to steal ale from people, right? It's obviously the imaginings of a very hungry person, right? So let's see. Her second confession, where she gets into more detail about her her sex life with the devil, but she also talks about the coven and the members and the spirits that attend to the members, and even down to like the color clothing that each of the spirit servants wears, right? So one spirit always wears yellow and another one always wears green. And the spirits have nicknames for the witches, and some of the nicknames are just like over the top. And my favorite one is one of the witches is called Pickled Nearest to the Wind. Why? Don't know.
Why?
Right? Another witch was called Over the Dyke with Her, which is dyke is a wall in Scotland. So just throw her over the wall. Awesome and cool. When she's talking about her sexual liaisons with Satan, every word is written down. The minute she starts going into fairy lore, the transcriber writes, etc., etc., etc. So Isabel might start saying something like, oh, yes, I met the fairy queen. We walked into the fairy mound at midnight on Candlemas, and she was in attendance by several hundred fairies and some goblins, and they were eating and drinking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I want to know. Tell me more, right? And so a real loss to folklorists there. On May 15th of 1662, she was brought before her interrogators for a third time. She was taking the information she previously provided about elf arrows. She revealed the names of the people that they killed using the elf arrows, expressing regret for the deaths she caused, and supplied the names of other coven members with the details of who they had murdered too. She gave an account of the devil sending her on an errand to Alderan disguised as a hare. Her narrative goes on to describe how, while in that form, she was chased by a pack of dogs. She escaped them by running from house to house until eventually she had the opportunity to utter the chant to transform herself back into a woman. She added that sometimes the dogs would be able to bite a witch when they were in animal form, but the dogs could not kill a witch. The bites and scars would appear on the human form once the witch assumed her normal shape. Let's see. Descriptions of dining with the devil and his beating of coven members and their responses to the beatings are recounted. Salacious details concerning sexual relations with the devil, together with broad characteristics of his genitalia, are chronicled. And there's a lot of, it's so big. It's bigger than any man's. Oh, yeah. All right. Okay, Isabel Janet. Let's see. And then her fourth and final confession, dated May 27th of 1662, basically confirms the first three previous testimonies, coupled with an attempt to elicit more information about the members of the coven to enable charges to be brought against them. 41 people were arrested as the result of Gowdie's statements.
Wow.
Yeah. And so here's this weird thing that happened. So Isabel wanders into the trial house on April 13th of 1662. 3 days earlier, on April 10th of 1662, the Privy Council had issued a proclamation prohibiting torture being used as a means of securing confessions from witches. So, odd, right? I mean, odd timing here. So it was, hey guys, we really can't be torturing people to get witchcraft confessions out of them. And so, sure, maybe you can do it, council, but there are procedures now in place that you have to follow if you're going to employ torture. Mm-hmm. And 3 days later, Isabel shows up to confess, right? And she doesn't. So since there's no real record of her being tortured, it's like, well, did she hear this proclamation or somehow word of it reach her? And did she decide to go in and offer a confession? And this is where things start to get dicey, right? Because I listened to a bunch of like Wiccan podcasts and everybody's convinced Isabelle Gowdy is who you want her to be. Okay. Some witches are convinced that she was an actual witch and that she was feeling the guilt of the spells that she had practiced, and so she went in to apologize. Others say, just a crazy, sad old woman, beaten down by life, looking for attention. Who knows? We don't know what happened to her. A great majority of the witches in Scotland who were accused were executed, so pretty likely that she was executed. And the fact that there's no record of it simply means, and I can say this, the Scots just didn't keep great records. That's it. It was like, you're a witch, you're dead. I don't need to write it down. Who cares? And that was that. And so this thing about the apology and Nicola Sturgeon apologizing, right? I asked James, who is Scottish, right? A couple of questions last night. And the first one was, hey, when you were growing up, did they talk about the witch trials? And he was like, no. So did you know that there were witch trials in Scotland? And he was like, no, not really. I mean, maybe, but probably not. It's just not a thing, right? I'm like, okay, all right, cool. And he was really more like, why bother? What's the point? Why did Nicola Sturgeon apologize? This feels like a big waste of time. It's not important. Nobody's running around saying, oh, help these poor witches. Well, apparently there are 2 witches in Scotland who are running around saying, oh, help these poor witches.
13,000 people signed the petition. So.
Was it that high? I didn't realize it was that high.
Oh, no. Sorry, 3,400.
Yeah, 3,400. That not that I remember that. I remember the 400. I thought it was only 400, but whatever, right? Here's my thing. I get that it was International Women's Day, and I get that Nicola Sturgeon is a great leader for Scotland. People in Scotland are quite divided on that, but I think she's a great leader. She is a woman herself. This all really makes sense. But also, Scotland was one of the few European countries not to apologize for the witch craze. This is Scotland's entry into Europe.
Okay.
Right now, they're part of the UK, and because of Brexit, Scotland isn't part of Europe officially, but they want to be.
Right.
They would happily leave the UK to join the EU. So let's see what happens in the future. But when Scotland declares independence and says, yep, we're European now, I am going to point to this podcast and say, we did it.
You predicted it.
We predicted it, but we also made it happen. So anyway, that's it. That's Isabelle Gowdy. That's witches in the late 1500s, early 1600s. No, late 1600s. That's it.
Yes, late 1600s.
We'll just say that's it.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the apology. I was not able to find the total text of the apology. I don't know if you were or not.
I was not either.
Okay, so I read it up above previously. So I won't go through it again. But I'd say overall, I would give her apology a 5 out of 10. And I think when you're looking at apologies, one of the things we want to see is a promise to never let the thing happen again. And I don't know how you'd promise not to torture and execute witches again, but as Nicola Sturgeon notes, there are other oppressed groups now that she could have mentioned and drawn a clearer parallel to and promised to do better for, but she didn't. So that's one reason why I don't give it a higher score. There was also no offer of repair to the victims or their descendants. So no promise of giving money or items to the people who descended from the witches. Normally also we expect a request for forgiveness, but it's kind of hard to ask for forgiveness on behalf of the people who did wrong and are not themselves able to apologize. I know the Pope did it last time, but that was a little bit of a different situation.
And he's the
head
Pope
of the Catholic Church, right? Entirely different thing. And I also personally would have liked to see her say that witches aren't real and that all religion is a sham, but that's probably too much to expect.
Well, yes, that would have been a very special Juliet apology.
That would have been great.
Right. Well, I mean, witches are real. There are witches out there.
People exist who say they're witches.
Yes.
But they don't, do things that witches are supposed to do. They don't consort with the devil or whatever, because there is no devil. So
I agree. Well, we'll just say
spells also don't work.
We live in a world that allows for many worldviews. And so one person's perception of reality differs greatly from another person's perception of reality. And in your reality, there is no such thing as witchcraft. And in my reality, watch out, there's a witch.
All right. That's fine. 5 out of 10. What do you give it?
I'm going to say I was all set to give it like a 7 because I thought that she did a really good job of taking something that was 400 years ago and could have very well just been a fun PR move or whatever. Well, we pardon all the witches and whatever, and we're going to spend $1,000 to build a thing. Cool, whatever. But they didn't do that. But I thought it was kind of a cool move. But you have actually altered my rating, right? And I will say 5 as well. Yeah. Because
makes sense to me.
I think you are right. I would not want her to say that witches are not real. How great if she'd gone behind the microphone and had said, "We're starting witch trials again. What a great idea."
That would be funny. I mean, not really, but
it would have been funny, but yeah, no.
It would have been awful.
So yeah, it's an apology that doesn't really do anything, and you're right in that it would have been better had she said, and this was the thing that really made me shave off 2 points, that she should have said something along the lines of government should not persecute citizens unjustly, and we will strive not to do the same. Not so much like, we promise never to burn another witch again, everybody. Ha, ha, ha.
Yeah.
But more, hey, we're going to watch out for innocent people who are wrongly accused. Or groups, we should say, right? And she flirts with it, but she doesn't say that. And so that, and then restitution was something that I was, we'll say, wrestling with last night. And our friend who came over for dinner is an attorney. And I was like, hey, I have a question to ask you for my podcast, because I'm too lazy to Google this. And also I don't think I'd understand what I was reading. So a government kills its citizens for whatever that reason is, right? We can't sue the government for killing groups of people because of this thing called sovereign immunity. And so it was really odd to me to think that governments in the West are typically democracies, so created by the people, and the people have decided that the people can't sue the people for a gross violation of justice. And I still don't understand why that's the case, but it's the case. It's the law. And our friend last night eventually just took my hand and said, honey, it's a podcast. Don't worry. You'll be fine. I'm kidding. She didn't do that. But at a certain point, I was like, you know what? I'm good. I don't understand a word you're saying. I don't even know that they're all in English. So yeah, that's it. So an average apology, Nicola Sturgeon, only because it was an opportunity for you to step up,
do better,
and say a little more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. In Juliet's world, you could have said a lot more. All religions are fictitious.
Religion is bullshit and harmful, and we should abolish all religion.
But
Signed,
then,
Nicola Sturgeon.
What will people do?
Drink.
Oh, all right. Well, then I'm on board. Let's make that happen.
They could go hiking. I don't know. They could do a lot of other things. Okay, so do you have a who's sorry now or an apology expected?
I do.
You do?
No, but I will.
I didn't think you... Okay, do you want me to tell you mine? Mine is really...
Yes, please.
Obvious. So I have an apology expected, and it's Bill Murray. And because he supposedly... what did he do? Like, I forget.
Improper behavior.
Improper behavior, but I don't know if there anything else was specifically described that he did. But he's on this movie, Searchlight Pictures movie called Being Mortal, and Searchlight sent a letter to the cast and crew saying that the filming was suspended because there was a complaint, and after reviewing the circumstances, it has been decided that production cannot continue at this time. And at the same time-ish last year, Lucy Liu said that Bill Murray verbally attacked her on the set of the 2000 movie Charlie's Angels, and that the language he used towards her was inexcusable and unacceptable. So he does have at least some sort of history of being questionable, having questionable behavior, but I don't know what his behavior was on Being Mortal. But I expect an apology from him. It'll be interesting to see if one is forthcoming.
I don't think Bill Murray's ever going to apologize.
I kind of get that feeling too.
Yeah, I don't know anything about him. I've heard he's not that nice, but that's kind of all I've ever heard.
Yeah.
But then I've also heard, like, from one person who did meet him that said he was the nicest guy in the world. They met on a golf course or something weird.
Yeah.
So yeah. But we'll just say that, like, people get reputations for being difficult, but I've never heard anything about him being like, I don't know of any sexual assault things. So maybe he's just a little bit of a jerk, but maybe. If you consider yourself a living icon.
Right. That's kind of a jerky thing right there.
Yeah, right, yeah. Hey, wait a minute. I do not have an apology expected, so I am going to, or who's sorry now, really. So I am going to cough out a real quick Rudy Giuliani appeared, all of them, everybody. Every witch ever.
Okay, go ahead.
Every ghost and goblin. Rudy Giuliani appeared on some TV show called The Masked Singer, and I expect an apology from the producers of The Masked Singer for having a traitor on their show.
Didn't somebody walk off?
Yeah, one of the judges walked off, and good for him. But the other two just stood up and cheered and danced. And I'm like,
God,
you
really?
assholes, man. It's like, what the fuck? This is the guy that doesn't want you to have rights over your own body.
Yeah.
And you are up there dancing and cheering. And yeah. This country is doomed. Doomed.
Yes, it is.
Totally doomed.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. We talked about that last night, about kind of like, sometimes it's just like too much, and I'm going to pull back and not watch a lot of news and just sort of like tend to my own little life. And then we talked about tomato plants. Then we got this long conversation about growing tomatoes and all that. And I forgot to tell you that Hildebrandt and Bingham have been viciously attacked by squirrels. Bingham, my strawberry plant, is not ever putting out any delicious red juicy strawberries because those squirrels rip them off while they're still green. And then the tomatoes, yes.
You should put a cage around them, like a wire fence thing, little, wire, whatever.
Did not occur to me at all. Didn't occur to me at all. I just want to complain about it.
You can get that at Home Depot, and then that would also keep your dog from shitting on it.
Nothing could make that happen. He will go where he wants to go. I don't know. But I know this. Another wonderful episode of Apologies Accepted, the podcast.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. We'll be back next week with another surprise topic.
It won't be about witches.
It won't be about witches, although this was a very interesting one. Okay.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Apologies Accepted, the podcast.
You can find links to the articles and the sources in the show notes.
To submit an apology or find out more, visit us at apologiesaccepted.net, where you can also find our merchandise.
We're on Twitter at Apologies Accepted.
And on Instagram at apologies.accepted.
You can support our important work at Patreon.com/Apologies Accepted.
And fuck Facebook.
Bye.
Bye.